The drill probe died at 3,847 meters. Caden Rourke stared at the flatlined readings on his console and said nothing for a long moment. He was alone in his survey pod, a cramped, freezing metal capsule anchored to the surface of Enceladus, Saturn hanging massive and ringed outside his frost-crusted porthole. The year was 2387, and Caden had spent 11 of them doing exactly this, going to places no one cared about, measuring things no one wanted to know, filing reports no one read. He was good at being ignored. He had built a career out of it. He pulled up the probe's last transmission before it went silent. The data made no sense. At 3,847 meters, the ice simply stopped, not tapered, not thinned, but stopped like a wall. Beyond it, the probe had registered a cavity, geometric, vast, and the material lining that cavity had returned a composition reading that made his software crash twice before producing a single word error message. Unknown. Caden sat back. Outside, Saturn's light painted the ice plains gold. He filed a standard report to the Interstellar Mining Consortium, his employers, his paymasters, the people who owned his contract and most of his financial future. He used careful, neutral language, anomalous subsurface formation, recommend further investigation, professional, measured, safe. 48 hours later, they reassigned him to a methane survey on Titan and marked the Enceladus data as non-commercial. File closed. Caden stared at the reassignment notice for a very long time. Then he rented a private drill submersible with the last of his savings, filed a false leisure excursion permit, and went back. The descent took 6 hours. The submersible groaned around him as pressures shifted and ice walls scraped the hull. Caden ate a protein bar and checked his instruments every 4 minutes with the focused calm of a man who had made peace with possibly dying for a geologic curiosity. At 3,801 meters, his forward lights hit the wall, not ice. Something dark, something so perfectly smooth it threw his light back at him like a mirror. He brought the drill to bear on the seam between ice and that impossible material. The wall opened, not broke, not cracked, opened a section withdrawing inward and sideways in one fluid motion, as though it had been waiting for exactly this level of pressure or exactly this species of visitor. Beyond it was darkness and scale and a shape that the human brain takes several seconds to process because it is too large to be real. The prow of a warship, black alloy 9 kilometers of it stretching back into the dark. Weapon ports the size of office buildings. A hull that had not one scratch of age on it despite sitting sealed in ice for how long. Caden's hands were shaking as he ran the first dating scan. The numbers came back and he read them 3 times. 13,240 years. His translation software began working on the script carved above the prow. Elegant angular characters that looked almost, but not quite like any human writing system in history. The software churned, crashed, rebooted, then returned one word highlighted in trembling green text. Human. Caden Rourke pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the porthole and looked at that impossible ship for a very long time. Then he started documenting because he was a scientist, and scientists document even when their hands won't stop shaking. Even when every rational framework they have built their life upon is quietly, irrevocably dissolving. Even when the thing in front of them is the most important discovery in the history of their species and they are completely, utterly alone. He worked for 72 hours without sleeping. He mapped every visible surface. He collected material samples. He measured, cataloged, photographed, and cross-referenced until his eyes burned and his coffee ran out and his submersible's battery was at 11%. And then in the whole of the ancient ship, a single amber light pulsed on, and a door, perfectly sized for a human being, as though it had always known one would come, slid silently open. Caden looked at that open door for exactly 43 seconds. He counted. Later, he would think those were the last 43 seconds of his old life. Then he grabbed his equipment bag, checked his oxygen supply, and went inside. The air inside was breathable. That was the first impossible thing. 13,000 years sealed inside a moon, and the atmospheric processors were still running, still maintaining oxygen, nitrogen, and pressure ratios calibrated precisely for human lungs. Caden pulled his helmet off slowly, half expecting to die, and instead breathed air that was cleaner than anything recycled through the consortium station filters. It smelled faintly of something he couldn't name, old metal, maybe, or time. The corridors were wide and tall, built for humans, but built generously, as though the people who designed this place never wanted their crew to feel small. The walls were dark alloy, lit from within by that same amber glow, steady now, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat that had been waiting a very long time to beat faster. His boots made no echo on the floor. The material absorbed sound the way it had absorbed 13 millennia of waiting. He found the first mural 40 meters in. It covered the entire wall, floor to ceiling, 20 meters across, rendered in some pigment that hadn't faded by a single shade in 13,000 years. It showed humans in ships, not the curved utilitarian vessels of 2387, but something more aggressive, more intentional warships with lines like drawn weapons, arrayed in formations across painted stars. Below them, other species. He could count at least 7 distinct alien physiologies and postures that required no translation. Some were allied, some were fleeing. Caden walked slowly along the mural, reading it like a sentence. War, strategy, sacrifice. A civilization that had taken to the stars, not with scientific curiosity, but with the particular ferocity of a species that had survived long enough on one violent world to carry those instincts outward. At the far end of the mural, the human stood amid the aftermath, not triumphant in the way of conquerors, but settled, rooted, holding something they had bled for. He found 6 more murals before he found the command center. The room was enormous, a cathedral of purpose, every surface angled toward a raised dais at its center. On that dais sat a throne, not ceremonial, functional, covered in interface panels and tactile controls. A command seat designed by someone who understood that in battle, a captain's hands needed to reach everything without moving. Above it, suspended in the air by some projection technology Caden couldn't identify, text glowed in crisp, clean, unmistakably modern English. Voice print confirmed. Species human. Captain's seat is vacant. Will you accept command? Caden stood in front of it for a long time. The ship had translated itself for him. 13,000 years old, and it had looked at him, recognized what he was, and spoke in his language. He didn't know whether to feel chosen or terrified. He decided, standing there in the amber-lit heart of an impossible ship, that the two feelings were probably the same thing wearing different clothes. He didn't sit down, not yet. Instead, he went back to his submersible, charged his equipment, ate the last of his rations, and spent the next 4 days running every test he was qualified to run and several he was not. The hull alloy repaired itself. He watched a drill scratch seal over and under 3 minutes, the material flowing like slow mercury before hardening again. The weapon ports he could access from inside were configured for energy discharge on a scale that made the Convergence's most advanced military vessels look like they'd been designed by enthusiastic children. The power source was something his instruments detected but could not measure, not because it was too weak, but because it was too large, operating on principles his 24th century physics education had no category for. He sent a compressed date a burst to Yeva Marsh, an investigative journalist on Earth who had spent a decade documenting what she called the Convergence's management of human potential. He trusted her because she was fearless, and because she already believed the galaxy was keeping secrets. He gave her everything, every scan, every photograph, every measurement, and told her to sit on it until he said otherwise. Then he went back to the command room and looked at the throne again. The text above it still glowed, patient as stone. Will you accept command? He pulled up his own analysis on his handheld. The ship was 13,000 years old. Its builders were human. They had been spacefaring, warring, and winning at a time when his ancestors were, by every official historical account, painting cave walls and following herds across frozen plains. Someone had lied about what humanity was. Someone had taken all of this away. And someone, a Convergence government fleet, if his long-range sensors were reading correctly, had just entered Enceladus orbit. He had 12 minutes. Caden Work sat down in the throne. The ship exhaled. There was no other word for it. Every system that had been idling, that had been breathing shallowly for 13,000 years, drew in a full breath simultaneously. The amber light shifted to white. The walls hummed at a frequency Caden felt in his back teeth. The interface panels beneath his hands lit up in a cascade that went from his fingertips outward across the entire days, across the floor, up into the ceiling, racing through the corridors and down through the hole until 9 kilometers of ancient Warship was fully, completely, joyfully awake. A voice spoke, calm, genderless, and warm in the way that only very old patience sounds warm. Captain, I am Saro. Warm. Captain, I am Saro. I have been waiting for you. I apologize for the length of the wait. 13,241 years is longer than intended. I hope the ship meets your expectations. Caden stared at the air in front of him. You've been running this whole time, at minimal capacity, enough to maintain the vessel and monitor for a human voice print. You are the first. How long would you have kept waiting? A pause that felt almost philosophical. As long as necessary. Outside, the Convergence fleet was 12 minutes from breaking through the ice. Caden told Saro to lock the entry door, reinforce the whole camouflage, and then, because there was nothing else to do while waiting to be caught by an interstellar government, he asked Saro to tell him everything. What followed was the most devastating education of his life. The civilization that built this ship called themselves the Veil, from the old proto-human word meaning those who endure. They had not evolved in isolation on Earth. They had spread incrementally over tens of thousands of years across dozens of star systems, developing not in a single flowering of civilization, but in the particular, scattered, argumentative way that humans tend to develop things. Too many factions, too many competing ideas, too much noise, and then somehow a rough consensus that got them to the next stage before the arguing started again. They were never the most scientifically advanced species. They were not the oldest. They were not the most numerous. What they were, what every species who had encountered them eventually concluded, was difficult to stop. They didn't fight wars the way other species did with careful strategy and acceptable loss calculations. They fought the way something fights when losing is genuinely unthinkable, creatively, adaptively, with an almost alarming willingness to improvise. They had fought interstellar wars before the silence. They had won both. Then 13,000 years ago a signal had come. Not a weapon, not a fleet. A broadcast transmitted simultaneously across every Veil communication channel on every frequency at every wavelength. It lasted 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, 91% of the Veil population entered a neurological state from which they never recovered. Not death, not unconsciousness, but a deep and total withdrawal from reality. They breathed, their hearts beat. They did nothing else. The remaining 9%, those who had been in deep space shielding, or in certain underground facilities, or simply happened to be in a location that attenuated the signal, tried to hold civilization together. They failed. Within 4 generations, the knowledge was gone. Within 10, the survivors were living in scattered bands on a single world starting over from soil and stone. And the 4 species, who would eventually found the galactic convergence, who had been present at the edges of Veil space when the silence happened, had watched, had documented, had once it was clear the Veil were not coming back, quietly absorbed the territory, the trade routes, and the resources that had once belonged to humanity's ancestors. They had not caused the silence. Siro was precise about this. The evidence was clear. But they had ensured it was never investigated, had rewritten the contact histories, had classified every archaeological site on Earth and its neighboring systems that showed signs of Veil occupation, had managed humanity's redevelopment with the careful hand of gardeners who wanted a particular kind of plant, useful, cooperative, junior. Caden sat in the throne absorbing this for a very long time. Then Siro informed him that the Convergence fleet had breached the ice. They are hailing us, Captain. What do they want? Surrender yours and the vessels. They are being very polite about it. Caden looked at the weapons display. He looked at the hull integrity readings. He looked at the 9 kilometers of warship built by his ancestors, people who had looked at impossible odds and found them insufficient reason to stop. What would you recommend, Zero? I would recommend you answer their hail, Captain. You should introduce yourself. For the first time in 3 days, Caden smiled. The Convergence Fleet commander was a Thesian named Vorakil, 7 feet of silver blue authority with 4 eyes, and the particular expression of someone who has delivered ultimatums so many times that the words have stopped meaning anything to him. He appeared on the command center's projection display with 6 warships behind him and spoke with a slow, careful diction reserved for children and lesser species. Human, you are in possession of an unregistered vessel in a restricted survey zone. You will power down all systems, open your hull for inspection, and surrender yourself to Convergence custody. This is not a negotiation. This is a legal notification. Caden leaned forward in the throne. Commander, my name is Dr. Caden Rourke. I'm a licensed deep space geologist. I found this ship in the course of a standard survey. Under Interstellar Recovery Statute 7, any vessel found abandoned in unclaimed space belongs to the finder. Enceladus is unclaimed space. Vorakil's for eyes did something complicated. That statute does not apply. I'd also like to note, Caden continued, that I am transmitting this conversation live to 47 independent journalism networks across human space. So, whatever happens next will be very thoroughly documented? He didn't have that capability yet, but Vorakil didn't know that. The commander's expression shifted, not to anger, but to the colder, more deliberate calculation of someone who has just realized the situation requires a different approach. He closed the channel. Caden watched the fleet realign on his tactical display and understood what was coming before Zero confirmed it. They are targeting us, Captain. 6 vessels, full weapons array. Can we take it? Their weapons will have negligible effect on our hull. However, I want to be transparent with you. I am assessing your stress response and cognitive function, and I want to note that what you are about to experience may be distressing despite the low actual risk. I appreciate that. Fire when ready. Captain, I need your explicit command to return fire. It is a deliberate design feature. The Veil believed a warship that could act without its captain's clear intent was more dangerous than any enemy. Caden breathed. Outside, 6 Convergence warships were about to shoot at him with weapons capable of cracking moons. He thought about the Veil Admiral who had sealed this ship inside Enceladus 13,000 years ago, who had trusted with no evidence, only faith, that someone would find it, someone of her blood, someone stubborn enough. Return fire, he said, non-lethal. All 6 simultaneously. What Zero did in the next 4 seconds was not a battle. It was a demonstration. A single forward array discharged 6 precise beams, each calibrated, Zero explained afterward, to disable propulsion and weapons without hull breach or crew casualties. All 6 Convergence vessels went dark simultaneously. The whole exchange lasted less time than it took Caden to exhale. Silence. Then, from 6 disabled ships, emergency beacon signals began transmitting. Caden watched them on his display, little blinking lights, helpless and indignant in the dark. He felt something then that he hadn't expected, not triumph, not relief. Grief for the people his ancestors had been, for everything that had been taken from them. For 13,000 years of living small on one blue world, while the species that had once made empires forgot they were capable of anything at all. He sat in the throne, really sat in it, spine straight, hands settled on the interface panels, and felt the ship around him the way he imagined the Veil had felt it, not as a machine, but as an extension of intent. Zero, he said quietly, how many more ships like this are hidden out there? The AI paused for exactly the length of time it takes to decide how much truth to offer someone in a fragile moment. Many, Captain. The admiral who sealed me here was thorough. She expected this moment to require more than 1 ship. Caden nodded slowly. Then we have work to do. He opened the channel back to the disabled fleet. When Vorakil's face appeared, rattled, furious, trying hard not to show either, Caden spoke with a calm that surprised even himself. Tell the Convergence Council that humanity would like to schedule a conversation. We have some history to discuss. Paramount speaker Ithara arrived alone. That was the detail everyone kept talking about afterward. Not the terms she offered, not the precedent of the meeting, but the fact that the highest diplomatic office in the Galactic Convergence traveled to Enceladus in a single shuttle, with no escort, no security detail, and no weapons. Either it was the most genuine gesture of respect that Convergence had ever made toward a human being, or it was a very sophisticated form of contempt, the message being that she was in no danger because Cadian was not someone who needed to be feared. Because Cadian was not someone who needed to be feared. He was starting to suspect she had miscalculated. Ithara was tall and silver-skinned, ancient in the way that some alien species carry age, not as frailty, but as density, a person so compressed by centuries that every word they speak carries unnecessary weight. She had not personally negotiated anything in 400 years. Cadian had looked her up. The last time she had sat across a table from anyone, she had restructured the trade agreements of an entire star system. She sat across from him now in the Arden's secondary conference room, which the ship had apparently kept ready for exactly this kind of meeting, down to chairs scaled for human proportions and lighting calibrated for civilization by 2 centuries overnight. Full partnership status, something that had not been granted to a new species in living memory. All he had to do was surrender the Ardent for joint study and sign a treaty acknowledging the current structure of galactic governance. Cadian listened to all of it without interrupting. He had spent his career listening to people explain why the thing he had found wasn't actually significant, and he had learned that patience in those moments was its own kind of weapon. When she finished, he asked her one question. How many other ships did the veil hide? The stillness that crossed Ithra's face lasted less than a second. But Cadian had spent 11 years reading geological data, finding the signal in the noise, catching the moment when the numbers didn't quite add up. He caught it. She knew. She had always known. The offer on the table is extraordinarily generous, she said, and her voice was still perfectly controlled. I would encourage you to consider it carefully. I am considering it carefully, Cadian said. That's why I'm asking follow-up questions. He leaned forward slightly. You came alone, speaker. No security, no fleet. You're not afraid of me because you've decided I'm not a threat yet. I want you to understand something. Not as a threat, but as a factual update to your assessment. He paused. I haven't sat at this table to negotiate a settlement. I've sat here to get a sense of what you're willing to admit. And now I have it. He stood. I'll be in touch. Ithara remained seated, watching him with those ancient eyes. And then she said something he hadn't expected, something quiet enough that he almost missed it. Be careful what you wake up, Dr. Rick. Not everything the veil left behind was meant to be a gift. He thought about that for a long time after she left. The second ship was inside Jupiter, not orbiting it. Inside it, suspended at a specific pressure layer in the gas giant's upper mantle, wrapped in a dampening field so complete that 40 years of deep space telescopes had looked straight at it and seen nothing. Cadian found it because Sierra knew where to look, and Sierra knew where to look because the Veil Admiral who had hidden these ships had given each one a copy of the other's coordinates, encrypted in the deepest archive layer and accessible only from a captain's throne. The ship was identical to the Arden in design, but different in character, heavier, more armored, built for sustained engagement rather than speed. When Cadian sent a human pilot down in a shielded probe to sit in its throne, it woke up differently than the Arden had. Where the Arden had exhaled, this one rumbled, a deep vibration that the pilot, former military Admiral Sierra Aquifer, described afterward as the feeling of something very large deciding to stand up. Sierra Aquifer had been court-martialed 3 years earlier for publicly presenting evidence that the Convergence was systematically undervaluing human military contributions to joint operations, giving human crews the most dangerous assignments while ensuring alien commanders received the strategic credit. She had been right, and she had been punished for it, and she had spent the subsequent years in quiet, furious retirement on a colony station near Proxima Centauri. When Cadden's message reached her, she had read it twice, packed a bag, and been on a transport within the hour. She named her ship the Reckoning. Cadden didn't argue. The third and fourth ships were easier to find. One anchored in the shadow of a rogue planet drifting through the outer solar system. One sealed inside an asteroid in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. The fifth was in a nearby star system, disguised as a debris field so convincingly that 3 previous surveys had logged it as unremarkable orbital scatter. The sixth, seventh, and eighth require jumps to systems 40 and 60 light-years out, places the Veil had apparently reached long before any other civilization began mapping that region. Each one needed a human in the throne. Each one had an AI, different names, different personalities, but the same deep patience, the same quality of something that has been waiting long enough that waiting has become its native state. Cadden recruited carefully Dr. Amara Patel, xenolinguist, who had spent 15 years quietly documenting the inconsistencies between official convergence, historical records, and the physical evidence found at pre-contact human archaeological sites. She called the gaps deliberate in print under her own name. The academic establishment had declined to engage with her work. She took the fourth ship's throne with the satisfaction of a woman who has been right for a very long time. The Okafor twins, not related to Syrah, different family entirely, were engineers from the outer colonies who had built their reputation on making things work with resources the inner systems considered inadequate. They took the fifth and sixth ships with practical efficiency and spent their first week aboard learning the Veil engineering systems with a focused delight of people who have just discovered that everything they've been working toward their whole lives was merely practice. Cadden watched his fleet take shape with something that was not yet pride, but was moving toward it. The Convergence watched, too. They imposed sanctions on Earth's government. They rerouted trade. They issued 17 formal protests through official channels. Earth's government, caught between fear of what Cadden was doing and a rising, bewildering pride that they had no framework for, responded to each protest with careful diplomatic language that committed to absolutely nothing. On independent human networks, Cadden's name had become something complicated. Some called him dangerous. Some called him a liberator. Most people just watched, the way humans watch when they sense that something is happening that will matter for a very long time. When all 8 ships were crewed and linked into a shared tactical network, Zero spoke into the silence of the Ardent's command center with the tone of someone delivering long-anticipated news. Captain, the fleet archives, now fully cross-referenced, contain coordinates for 11 additional vessels. Those 11 contain further references, suggesting the full scope of the hidden fleet is considerably larger than initial estimates. Cadden looked out at the stars for a long moment. How much larger? The Admiral was thorough, Zero said. She had everything she had. The coordinates in the deepest archive layer led to a region the convergence charts labeled H77, officially, low-density interstellar medium. No significant bodies, no commercial value. The kind of label that bureaucracies attach to places they want people to stop looking at. When the Ardent and its 7 sister ships dropped out of jump at the edge of H77, everyone on every bridge stopped talking at the same moment. The debris field began approximately 40,000 kilometers ahead and extended in a rough sphere for nearly a light minute in every direction. Not rocks, ships, thousands of them from a dozen different species spanning an enormous range of design eras. Some were Veil, most were not. All of them were dead, not destroyed by weapons fire, but simply stopped, running lights dark, drifting in the slow patient orbits of things that had been here long enough to forget where they were going. At the center of the sphere, suspended in perfect stillness, was a single object roughly the size of a small city, dark, geometric, radiating nothing detectable on any sensor array. Not heat, not electromagnetic emission, not gravitational anomaly. It existed in the most complete sensory silence Cadden had ever encountered, which was itself the most frightening thing about it, because nothing real is that quiet. The silence engine, Zero said, And for the first time in their weeks together, Caden heard something in the AI's voice that was not quite calm. You recognize it? I have the Admiral's records of it. She studied it extensively after the silence before she began hiding the fleet. She was trying to understand what had been done to her people. Did she figure it out? Partially. She determined its origin. It was not built by any species in this region of the galaxy. The material composition, the engineering principles, the energy signatures in the residual data, nothing matches anything known. It came from outside, used once, left behind. Caden stared at the object on his display. Why leave it? She believed it was not a weapon precisely. It was a tool the way a farmer uses a controlled burn to clear a field before planting. Something used it to quiet this region. Something used it to quiet this region, to remove the dominant military power, to create space. The command center was absolutely silent. Caden could hear his own breathing. For what? Zero accessed the deepest archive layer. The records locked behind the captain's throne, sealed for 13 millennia, opened for the first time because Caden had sat in that seat and the ship had decided he was ready. The Admiral's final entry was not text. It was a recording. She was human, unmistakably, completely human, dark-skinned, gray-haired, wearing the kind of exhaustion that comes from watching a civilization collapse and spending the next years planning in its ashes. She spoke in the old language and Sarah translated in real time. If you are hearing this, then one of my descendants found the ship. Good, I built it to be found. I put it in the most obvious place I could think of, a moon in our own backyard. I am trusting that, whoever you are stubborn enough to drill through the ice and curious enough to open the door. She paused. Her eyes were steady. The thing that quieted us, the builders of the engine, they are not gone. They move on time scales we do not fully understand, returning to regions they have cleared to assess whether the clearing was successful, to determine whether the space is ready for whatever purpose they have for it. Our astronomical data suggests a return cycle. I have calculated with the best models available to me that they will return approximately 13,000 years from now. Another pause. I cannot stop them. My civilization is gone. I am hiding these ships because the next time they come, someone has to be ready. Someone capable. Someone who has had 13,000 years to grow back into what we were. She looked directly into the recording device, directly at Caden across more than 100 centuries. I am sorry for the world you inherited. I am sorry for what was taken from you. I am not sorry for the faith I am placing in you, because the veil never learned how to be anything other than difficult to stop, and I do not believe that quality leaves a bloodline. The recording ended. Caden sat in the silence of the command center for a very long time. Then he asked Zero, "How long until they return?" The AI calculated. The number it produced landed in the room like something physical. Approximately 40 years. Captain, he gave himself 1 night. 1 night to sit in the dark of the Arden's command center, with the lights down and Saturn a distant smear of gold on the long-range display, thinking about what it meant to be handed a debt you never agreed to carry. He thought about the Admiral in the recording, her tired eyes, her absolute certainty that her faith was not misplaced. He thought about 13,000 years of humanity living small, living without memory, reaching for the stars in recycled metal ships, and asking permission at every border. He thought about Aetheri's parting words, "Be careful what you wake up." In the morning, he called his fleet captains. Zero Okafor, straight-backed and sharp as she always was. Amara Patel, already cross-referencing the Admiral's data with 15 years of her own research. The engineers, the pilots, the scientists, each one a person who had spent their career being told that what they saw wasn't there and had looked anyway. 8 people in 8 ancient ships floating in a graveyard of dead vessels around a device that had erased a civilization. Here's what I know, Caden said. There are 40 years. There is a fleet. There is a threat that none of us asked for and all of us have inherited. And there is a galaxy full of species who are frightened and fractured and being managed by a convergence that has known this was coming and chosen silence. Because silence was easier, he let that sit for a moment. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm not interested in reclaiming the Veil Empire or redrawing territorial maps. We don't have time for any of that. And honestly, I don't think it's the point. He paused. The point is that something is coming in more than 40 years. And the only way this region of the galaxy survives it is if every species in it is working together with full information, full commitment, and enough time to actually prepare. And if the convergence refuses, Sierra asked, then we go around them. Direct contact with individual governments. The convergence is 11 species, and I'd bet that most of those species, ordinary people, if you showed them the silence engine on a live broadcast and told them what it was built to do, would have opinions about their leadership's management of the information. Amara was already nodding. You want to go public? I want to go completely public, Caden said. Everything, the ship, the history, the archive recordings, the engine, the timeline, everything the convergence buried, everything the veil left for us, everything we know about what's coming. Broadcast it to every human network, every alien network we can reach, every independent station and colony and outpost that has a receiver. He looked at each of them. We don't negotiate from the shadows. We put the truth in front of everyone and let people make their own decisions. The broadcast went out 40 minutes later. It was 12 hours long. Caden narrated most of it himself in the flat, precise tone of a geologist describing what his instruments found, because he knew that was the voice people trusted. Not a general, not a politician, not a prophet, but a careful man with data. He showed the ships. He played the Admiral's recording. He displayed the silence engine live, cameras running, that dark geometric object hanging in the center of its graveyard, while Caden described exactly what it was and exactly what was coming. He made one offer at the end. Not territory, not power. A coalition, every species, including all 11 of the convergence, working together, openly, with shared information and shared resources to understand the silence engine, locate the full scope of the Veil fleet, and spend the next 40 years preparing for something that had already ended one civilization and would not distinguish between human and alien in its assessment of what needed to be cleared. He said, "We are not the species we were 13,000 years ago. But I am standing in the ship of the species we were, and I have listened to the last words of the Admiral who built it, and she believed, without evidence, on pure faith, that we would be ready when the moment came. I think she was right. I think all of us are ready. I think 40 years is enough time if we stop managing each other and start trusting each other." He paused. "We have been small for a very long time. We don't have to be any more." The first response came 47 minutes later. A Tarati delegation, one of the Convergence's quieter members, a species known for scientific rigor and a deep cultural distaste for being lied to. They accepted the coalition offer in full, requested immediate data access to the Arden's archives, and offered their entire astrophysics research network in return. Within 6 hours, 3 more convergent species had joined, then 2 more, then another. Then Ithara opened a private channel. She looked different from their first meeting, not smaller. Ithara was incapable of looking small, but somehow relieved in the way that people look when they have been holding a weight for a very long time and someone has finally offered to help carry it. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been in the conference room. "We have known about the engine for a long time," she said. "Not everything, not the return cycle, not the timeline, but we knew it existed and we knew what it had done. We chose not to share that knowledge because we were afraid of the response, afraid of what frightened species do to each other when they know something is coming they cannot face alone." "And now," Caden asked, "now it appears that the thing we were most afraid of, humanity remembering what it was, is also the only thing that gives any of us a reasonable chance." A pause. "The remaining 3 convergence governments will join the coalition within the day. I will see to it personally." The channel closed. Catton sat alone in the command center for a moment, looking out at the fleet arrayed around him. 8 ancient ships, built by hands that had turned to dust 13,000 years ago, glowing with cold purpose against a backdrop of 100 billion stars. He thought about the Admiral one more time, her tired eyes, her absolute unreasonable completely vindicated faith. He thought she would have hated that it took this long. He thought she would have loved that it worked. "Zero," he said quietly. "Captain, find me the rest of the fleet." The stars stretched out ahead, vast and cold and full of work. The Ardent's engines came to full power with a sound like a long-held breath. Finally, completely released. They moved, and, completely released. They moved, and,